Good kill, good kill. Hey, good kill.
The Iran-Iraq War was a protracted armed conflict that began on the 22nd of September 1980 with a surprise full-scale invasion of Iran by neighboring Iraq under Saddam Hussein. While the Iraqi leadership had hoped to take advantage of Iran's post-revolutionary chaos and expected a decisive victory in the face of a severely weakened Iran, the Iraqi military only made progress for 3 months, and by December of 1980, the Iraqi invasion of Iran had grinded to a halt. As fierce fighting broke out between the two sides, the Iranian military began to gain momentum against the Iraqis and regained virtually all of its lost territory by June of 1982. After pushing the Iraqi forces back to the pre-war borderlines, Iran invaded Iraq and went on the offensive for the next 5 years. Stopping the Iraqi invasion and reversing the tide of the war was largely due to the efforts of the Iranian Air Force and their ability to establish air superiority over the battlefields, first with their far superior F-14 Tomcats, and finally by launching daring operations to destroy Iraqi air assets and infrastructure on the ground. One such attack was the H-3 Airstrike, which was a surprise air attack by the Iranian Air Force during the Iran-Iraq War on the 4th of April 1981 against the H-3 airbase in western Iraq. The Iranians destroyed at least 48 Iraqi aircraft on the ground with no losses of their own. Based on the results achieved, it is considered one of the most successful raids in the history of aerial warfare. The H-3 airbase consists of 3 parts: H-3 Main, H-3 Northwest, and H-3 Southwest. It is located near the town of El Walid, close to the Baghdad-Amman highway near the Jordanian border, and is more than 1,000 kilometers from the Iranian border. It was erected to secure the western borders of Iraq and was also used in the Yom Kippur War in 1973 against Israel. According to Iraqi sources, during the Iran-Iraq War, it was used as a support airbase for the Iraqi Air Force and housed no more than a few transportation squadrons and a squadron of MiG-21s, as well as retired Hawker Hunters. The Iranian Air Force had received credible intelligence that Iraq had been reinforced by the arrival of a large amount of ammunition and spare parts from Egypt, as well as the delivery of Mirage F-1s from France and the Tupolev 22 bombers from the Soviets, and had been preparing for an imminent major ground and air offensive against Iran. According to Iranian intelligence, the Iraqi Air Force had relocated most of its valuable assets to the Al Walid Air Base, located in the H-3 complex, in an attempt to keep the massing of these new assets as secret as possible. Being more than 1,500 kilometers from the Iranian fighters at Shahroki Air Base, the H-3 complex was out of range, and if choosing a direct route, the Iranian aircraft would have had to fly over Baghdad and perform aerial refueling twice in Iraqi airspace, including once near Baghdad, which was obviously impossible due to Baghdad being heavily fortified by Iraqi air defense sites. A team of Iranian commanders planned a more sophisticated surprise operation instead. Senior Iranian military officials had determined that the Iraqi Air Force activity was lower in northern Iraq, so a plan was devised to approach the Iraqi sites from that direction. The Iranian commanders decided to fly their aircraft to Urmia Lake first and refuel in the air, and then from there they would have a clean route passing over the mountains of northern Iraq and the Turkish border, while keeping the altitude at less than 300 feet or 100 meters to avoid Iraqi and Turkish radar sites. The route was around 3,500 kilometers. Nevertheless, the Phantoms could not reach their targets without air-to-air refueling a number of times. The Iranian 31st and 32nd Tactical Fighter Wings employed 8 McDonnell Douglas F-4E Phantoms, 4 F-14A Tomcats, 1 Lockheed C-130, and a Boeing 747 Airborne Command Post, which was to monitor Iraqi radio communications and also act as a communication relay between the F-4 Phantoms and Iranian headquarters. Also included in the strike mission were 2 tankers, a Boeing 707 and a Boeing 747 for aerial refueling for the attack. The operation began at 10:30 a.m. on the 4th of April 1981. A formation of 8 F-4 Phantoms accompanied by 2 airborne reserves departed from Hamadan Air Base and proceeded towards Urmia Lake. After refueling in friendly airspace, they crossed into into Iraq while the 2 reserve aircraft returned. A pair of F-14 Tomcats patrolled the area hours before and after the strike to counter any interception attempts by the Iraqi Air Force. Meanwhile, 3 F-5E Tigers from Tabriz Air Base performed diversionary attacks on Huria Air Base near Kirkuk with unknown results, but certainly distracting Iraqis away from the Phantoms. The C-130 was flying near the Iran-Iraq border sometime earlier. The 2 tankers, which had already been sent to Syria, had taken off from a Syrian airport and then clandestinely diverted from international commercial corridors in total radio silence, while apparently being bound for Iran. Flying at a very low altitude over southern Turkey and eastern Syria, they crossed mountainous northwestern Iraq and finally joined the Phantoms over the western Iraqi desert. Each Phantom refueled 4 times from the tankers at an altitude of 300 feet, which was extremely dangerous and far below any safety standard. This was done to avoid detection by Iraqi radars. However, the fighters briefly did appear on Iraqi radars, but were mistaken for Turkish aircraft patrolling the border. High-ranking Iranian commanders supervised the operation from a command Boeing 747 that was in Syrian airspace. The Syrian airport of Palmyra could also have been used for possible emergency landings and diversions. While approaching the airbase, the Phantoms split their formation into 2 groups. This allowed attacks to come from several directions on the H3 complex. They bombed all 3 airfields within the H3 complex, achieving complete surprise. The fighters made several passes against all 3 air bases. Both runways at Al Walid were targeted in order to prevent any Iraqi aircraft from taking off. Cluster bombs of the second group of Phantoms damaged 3 large hangars. The Phantoms were able to make multiple attacks on multiple targets with cannon fire. By the end of the second group's attack, the Iraqi military forces had not responded with a coordinated counterattack. Effective anti-aircraft fire was also impaired due to the surprise attack. Iraqi aircraft were scrambled from another base in an unsuccessful attempt to intercept the Iranian force. After the attack, the Iranian formation turned back towards their own base, having knocked out the H3 airbase and destroyed at least 48 enemy aircraft on the ground for the loss of none of their own. The attack was a major blow to Iraqi morale and sent a message by the Iranian Air Force that there was nowhere in Iraq that was safe from Iranian air power. Knocking out almost 50 aircraft in a total surprise attack with 0 casualties makes the Iranian airstrike on the Iraqi H3 airbase one of the most successful raids in the history of aerial warfare.